This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's oral history program, Living Legends Collection. There is no original date given for this interview. The interview is conducted by Mary B. Roberts. The interviewee is Mr. Archie F. Butts, Butts, of Enid, Oklahoma. This interview is being re-recorded on December the 6th, 1984 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Mitchner.
Okay, you're on.
That was Dr. England.
Yes.
Would you give me your name, please? Your full name.
Archie F. Butts.
And your parents?
Jesse T. Butts and Rebecca V. Butts.
All right, and I believe your family had a claim here beginning in 1893 with the run.
My father staked a claim 12 miles southeast of Enid during the run on September 16th, 1893.
Did he come by horseback or train or
he came
wagon?
In from Clay County, Texas by train, and then by horseback from the line north of Hennessy, Oklahoma. And before the start of the run, he was, the Army commandeered him as a sort of a guard and gave him a rifle and told him to keep the people in line until they fired the gun for the start of the run. He didn't feel so good about that, but he did function until just before the run started, and he wanted to be sure to get a claim, so he set the rifle up against a fence post and started in a northeasterly direction and staked this claim. If he'd gone another 100 yards further, he would have staked school land.
Oh.
But fortunately, he did get a...
That was where luck was with him then,
Yes.
in the beginning.
Yes, and he used to, every once in a while, he would wonder about whether the government ever got that rifle back or not.
But when did you come on the scene, Mr. Butts?
We came from Henrietta, Texas to Hennessy in the early spring of 1894. And I entered school there, and until the weather got warm, and my father had built a one-room house and a lean-to on the farm, and we moved out there when the weather got warm.
Yes, so you could.
In 1894.
Had you started school in Clay County before you came here?
In Hearnville, Clay County.
Yes.
That's north of Henrietta, Texas.
I know about where it is.
Mm-hmm.
Then you had already started your school days, or were you in school?
Well, I was 4 years old when we immigrated from Clay County, or Saline County, Missouri, to Clay County, Texas, and I was 7 years old when we came into this country. But when I went to school at Hearnville, I was really younger than school age.
Yes. So you really began your school years then here in Oklahoma?
Yes, my real school years.
Yes. Was it the typical country schoolhouse, or was it in several grades in one room?
All grades in one room, and that school was located at the southwest corner of what is Fairmount now, Fairmount, Oklahoma.
Yes.
And At that time, that was before there was any roads in that part of the country, and my father laid out a lot of the section lines out there. And I just cut across the country and waded the creeks to get to the schoolhouse. And well, we had all sorts of students there, married women and youngsters just school age, and we had our spelling matches. And
Oh, that was
the
quite.
highlight of my life at that time was one day when I spelled down the entire school.
That was an honor now.
Yes.
Well, they in those early days, you spoke of the spelling matches. Uh, were there other forms of entertainment?
Oh, yes.
I know they worked very hard, but
Yes,
weren't
they
there?
had their pie suppers and their literary meetings and Christmas programs, and there was quite a lot of social life at that time, and there's no different stratas. Everyone was on the same
That's right.
level,
That's
as
right.
poor as people could be, and it was.
So you didn't have your high
yeah.
society then. It was
No,
all.
we had our religious meetings. Most of them were held in barn lofts out at that time, and
No churches yet built.
well, it was about a couple of years later that churches began to be built.
Do you recall which ones were the early ones
The
to
first
come in?
one that I ever attended was known as the Bank Schoolhouse, and it got its name by being it had housed a bank in some other place, and it was moved in about 3 miles or 4 south of where Farmont is now.
And that was how it was named.
Hmm.
The church furnished quite a bit of entertainment, did it not? Also,
Oh,
a
yes.
social life
Yes,
built
it did.
around it. Their quiltings and their
Yes.
pie suppers and ice cream suppers and bake sales. Did they have all those?
Oh, yes, yes. And every Sunday, we after the church, while the people would gather up, and certain people would go home with other
Yes.
people,
And those Sunday dinners.
oh yes, and
Oh.
we always tried to go with someone that had plenty of food.
And a good cook.
Yes, most of them were good cooks, and back at that time, they didn't assemble a meal. They prepared
right.
it and served it.
They didn't take it out of the deep freeze, did
No,
they?
no. But it was a good social life here at that time, and
And the neighborliness of those days, illness or sickness or misfortune or anything brought the people together and brought the neighbors in.
there was very little money in the country at that time. At one time in our family, I had all the money we had, and that's 2 silver dimes. And that's all there was. And they bartered. One person would have a hog, and some other person would have a calf, and other persons would have a flock of chickens, and they'd swap back and
They
forth.
traded.
But there's really not a lot of money in there.
Well, as the economy began to develop, uh, were there wages? Did they work for money, or was it mostly just
Generally an exchange of labor.
exchange?
Yes,
Mhm.
and of course for the first 2 years our crops were failures, and then the third year we had a real good wheat crop, and we had no granary at that time, so we moved out into the yard and put the wheat in the house, and my mother put quilts on top of the wheat, and we slept on those.
Good idea.
Yes, it worked out
Those
all right.
inventive things like that belonged to that age,
And
didn't
we
they?
hauled our wheat to North Enid, our first crop, and sold it there. But when the country was first opened, they'd burned it off, and it was just black, burned grass, and the only thing
That was before the cattle raising started,
oh
I take
yes,
it.
yes.
There wouldn't have been fire then. Uh, uh, it started then with the wheat. That was your main product from the farm.
Yes, wheat and kaffir corn.
Those were the first ones.
Of course, we had this country was a great producer of watermelons too on the sod.
Really?
Oh yes, and
Didn't know that.
we put out on our farm. We put out a bunch of seedling peach trees and cherry trees, and they were short-lived. And wasn't but a few years until they all died out.
Well, you had to find out what was adaptable to this
Yes,
country.
mhm.
It was truly virgin soil
Very
and
good.
also virgin experience so far as...
A terrific shortage of water. There just wasn't much water, and out in our section of the country, the water was well, quite salty, but we grew accustomed to it, and whenever we got to a place where we would get nice sweet water, we didn't like it. It wouldn't do us. It wouldn't quench our thirst like the water we was used to.
Well, there was a place called Buffalo Springs in near there, was there not?
Yes, Buffalo Springs is on down south toward Hennessy, down in that country. And,
Was
we
that...
we had the government springs here in Enid,
Yes.
and that was quite a camping place for the Indians and the traders going back and forth on the Chisholm Trail.
Oh, yes. Do you remember any particular incidents that we might get from the early days, say when the settlers and the Indians were first making their acquaintance each of the other?
Well, there was most of the time there was a camp of Indians in the Government Springs Park, and they used to camp there, and this isn't very nice, but they'd go down to the slaughterhouse and get the refuse there and bring it up and put it over their wagon tongues and dry it, and they'd get all the stray dogs in the town.
And that was their food.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the Indian children would practice with their bow and arrows, and they could hit a penny as far as from here, 40, 50 feet away.
The children?
Yes, the children. And they'd help themselves to your firewood, and they needed it in the evening. And it was Indians camped down there most of the time.
But there was no real friction then, or other than just
they
trying to...
curious people would go down and visit the camp, and they'd enjoy seeing how the Indians lived, and lots of them was doing handcraft work, the squaws mostly.
Let's go on to your early career. Then your high school work was done where? Your high school.
Oh, I attended grade schools in Enid. And then in 1902, my father went back to Sheridan County, Missouri, and bought a plantation back there. And we moved back on that for about 3 years. And during that time, I finished my education in the North Missouri Academy at Salisbury, Missouri.
Oh, yes.
And we lived there until about 19 1904, the early part of 1904, when we bought land near Douglas, Oklahoma, and the family moved there. And in the fall, I came into Enid and attended the Enid Business College, and in the meantime, my father and some other men had bought the bank at Drummond, and they needed help to run it, and I left the business college and went to the Bank of Drummond in the fall of 1905.
And that was the beginning then
That
of
was
your...
the beginning of my banking career.
That's right. They,
Yeah, thank you.
then after your first banking experience there, when did you transfer to Enid?
I was there about 1 year, and we sold the bank to some bankers at Waukonis, Oklahoma, and I came into Enid, and my father and Dr. Cotton and James French and E.S. Welch owned a bank where Evans Drugstore is now. It's the American State Bank, and I went to work there. And I worked there. That bank then was sold to Garfield Exchange Bank. It was owned by J.B. Ferguson, and I stayed there until the 15th day of April 1910, when I went in with Mr. Champlin in the First National Bank.
I see. And that was the beginning then of the banking rise and of your eventual presidency and chairman of the board.
I have been in the employ of a bank from the 15th day of April 1910 up to right now.
I should say that you know the banking business, Mr. Butts.
Well, I think I do. It's quite different than it was when when I went in the bank. We never dreamed of a guarantee of deposit, a Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Every bank stood on its own capital structure, and people were a lot more particular about the bank they did business with at that time than they are now.
Because they realized that it wasn't a guarantee except perhaps the man that was behind it.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
I believe that there was a story about the fundraising campaign that you participated in, and also perhaps the story with Dr. England.
Well, the bond drives, there were 7 of those that I handled here in this county and in this district, which consisted of several counties. And we were successful in meeting our quota in all of those drives.
Now, this was World War II.
Yeah, this was World War II. But when the president, when they got into the financial trouble in 32, and numerous banks over the United States were closing, and the governor of Oklahoma at that time was William H. Murray, and the other banks in Enid followed his mandate and closed, and I refused to close our bank because for some reason or other we had a little inkling that this thing might happen, and for several weeks I would go to the clearinghouses in Wichita and other places and get all the currency that I could get, and I'd fly it in here by airplane. And when this trouble really broke out, we continued to keep our bank open, and was quite an exchange of telegrams between Mr. Champlin and Governor Murray, but we refused to close. And
Now, this was the banking moratorium.
yeah, well, it
Was
hadn't
it?
started the moratorium
Hadn't
yet,
actually begun.
but we did not close, and Murray threatened us and told us that he would send the National Guard up to close it if we didn't. And Colonel William A. Graves was in charge of the army that was here, the National Guard, and he came over the morning that they closed us and told me that we were the only bank in the state that was open, and that I'd save myself a lot of trouble and my bank if we would close. I told him we wouldn't, and he said, well, the army was on the way, and in about an hour they came in, and Steve England was the head of them. He came up and made a demand on me. Mr. Champlin and his brother Fred was standing in the doorway of an office back in the building, and they left me out in front there in the bullpen to meet the army. And I told Steve that if we closed, that I would like to see the order before we were closed, and he said it was coming by courier, and I said, well, we better wait till it gets here before you close us. But I offered him the keys, and he didn't take them. In the meantime, the army had set up outside, and they'd put their guns, their machine guns, and established a 5-foot zone around, military zone. And a rather funny thing happened. One of our good customers came in, and he said, what in the world are the Boy Scouts doing out around the bank? But we finally sent the governor a telegram saying that we were a national institution, and we didn't feel that he had jurisdiction over us, and that he was getting some very bad advice, and asked him not to press his unlawful demands against us. Well, we were getting ready to go into federal court and enjoin him from molesting us, and the next day President Roosevelt declared the bank holiday, and of course we never did lock our bank up, but soldiers wouldn't let anyone in or out.
Yeah.
And but in about 5 days they lifted the moratorium, and we were among the first to reopen.
Mm-hmm.
I was glad to have the army around there, because I had not only all of our safes full, but
right.
I had a lot of safe deposit boxes
Yes.
full of cash that I was glad to have them guard.
That you had saved up.
Yes.
Well, your foresight was the thing that put you over on that then.
Yes.
Let's give you this. Mm. Oh, so simple.
In 1907, I was working in the American State Bank. It was a year that we had a money panic. Money absolutely disappeared from circulation. And we had no clearinghouse in Enid at the time, but the banks realized that something had to be done, and our bank just opened a note case and let our largest depositors of which we had very few, come in, and if they would rather have a note than to have their deposit, we'd let them take a note out of our note case. But we would pay our customers $5 each. I just filled out a whole bunch of $5 checks so they could sign them and get their $5 in money. And if they wanted more than that, we gave them clearinghouse certificates. Each bank, we formed a pool, and each bank took notes out of its note case. They all picked the poorest notes they had and put them in that pool. Excuse me. And then they issued clearinghouse certificates against it. And I was waiting on the front window when one of our customers came in and made a demand on me for his money. I told him that we couldn't pay it to him, that we could give him $5, and not all the clearinghouse certificates he wanted, and the merchants were taking them just like cash. He gave me to understand that he didn't want any clearinghouse certificates. He was going to have his money, or somebody was going to get shot. And I told him, I said, well, I just work here. I have nothing a lot to do with the running of the bank, and if you're not satisfied with what I can do for you, you go around in the front office there, and they'll give you notes or anything you want. But I said, in a few days this thing will work over and you can get your money. Of course, he didn't know it at the time, but there was a deputy sheriff sitting right there by the window, and had he drawn a gun, that deputy would have killed him. And but that man, all the rest of his life, was a customer of our bank and a good friend of the bank after he cooled off. But in the early days of the country, people raised sugar cane on sod that produced wonderful cane. My father set up a sorghum mill, and we made sorghum molasses. Of course, at that time you didn't know that they were full of vitamins, sorghum molasses.
That's right.
And but it was a necessary food. You had to eat it or else. There wasn't anything else. But we had one customer that he drew some cane on salty land, and when he made the molasses, they were salty, almost too salty to eat. But we did very well with that cane mill, but there was no wood, firewood in this country then. We had to go down to where Marshall is now. At two little towns down there was Columbia and Sheridan. And we'd go down there and stay all night and cut blackjacks and bring it back. But that was later on. But it was my job when we had that cane mill to, after they run the cane through the crusher, they had what they called pumice. And I was spreading that one day barefooted, and I ran a pitchfork into my foot. And I didn't advertise the fact much, and I got infection in that, and they just thought that I wasn't going to get well. And one morning I got so bad that my father and mother loaded me in a lumber wagon with some straw and a quilt on it, and we went up north of our place a few miles to where Dr. Woods lived, and we stopped there, and his wife told us that he had gone to Enid, and at that time there was just one road led to that whole country, and anybody going to Enid had to be on that road. So Mrs. Woods gave us his instrument case, and of course we were driving as fast as our team would go. We caught up with him on out here now what is Woodring Airfield.
Yes.
And we stopped, and he took one look at me, and he told my father, he said he's going to have relief very soon. And they took the quilt out of the wagon box and laid it on the prairie there, and laid me on it, and my father held me down, and the doctor took his scalpel and run it back into my foot to full length, and then pulled it out.
Cleaned it out.
Pulled it out through the sole of my foot, which is like leather. Everybody went barefooted then, and that foot just exploded.
Oh.
And I was sick, so we went on back home, and on the way back we stopped at a neighbor's, and she felt so sorry for me that she took her seed sweet potatoes and cooked them for my meal. But I was sick all summer, and with that infection. And in the fall, the doctor and two of his children called on us, and they ate supper with us. And they was a boy and a girl, and one was he called Okla, and the other Homa. And I had worried that he'd never been paid for my operation, and I was worried about it. So while they were eating, I slipped around. And I was sick, so we went on back home, and on the way back we stopped at a neighbor's, and she felt so sorry for me that she took her seed sweet potatoes and cooked them for my meal. But I was sick all summer, and with that infection. And in the fall, the doctor and two of his children called on us, and they ate supper with us. And they was a boy and a girl, and one was he called Okla, and the other Homa. And I had worried that he'd never been paid for my operation, and I was worried about it. So while they were eating, I slipped around and asked him. I told him I wanted to pay him, and I wondered how much I owed him. And he said, well, turned to the boy, and he said, how much shall we charge him? Oh, he said, $1. So I had $1.
And you paid it.
And I paid it.
Well, I do know. Do you have another story for us? Those are interesting.
That's about all I can think of at the moment.
Well, when I noticed that you are a charter member of the Chamber of Commerce and have also been named Man of the Year in 1964. Tell us something about the early organization of the Enid Chamber of Commerce. It's been very active.
Well, we didn't have an active chamber in the early history of the country. That was before my time, and really. But I was a member of the chamber from the time it became active, and about the time that I went into the bank, and I became vice president during my membership, and then through the chamber I became active in these other organizations, the Community Chest, and of course I was the International Typographical Union appointed me as treasurer of the March of Dimes, which later became the Infant
Paralysis.
And I was in that for 25 years. I have a 25-year pin
that's wonderful.
for that. And my father, he was rather active in politics. He was county commissioner and mayor of the town at one time, and he was in office at the time. We had an antiquated streetcar system here, and it was a disgrace to the town. The tracks were in the middle of everything. And over one weekend, he got his people together and tore the tracks all up over the weekend. And Monday morning, there wasn't any tracks for the streetcars to run on.
That's the way the system was closed out
That's
then.
the way they did things back in those days. Mm.
Well, tell us something about the lady that you married.
Well, I met her at a business college picnic, and I was going to the Enid Business College at that time, and we went together for several months and decided that we would like to get married. And at that time, I was a Drummond, and we had made arrangements to get married and move down there. And in the meantime, we sold the bank, and I came into Enid, and we were married on the 14th day of November, 1906, and she was a stenographer in a law office here in town. She was getting $35 a month, and I was working in the bank, and I was getting $35 a month. And we were married, and I had a lot out 821 East Cherokee Street, and we built a little 4-room house on that lot, and lived there till 1918, and we built a house at 1730 East Broadway, and we have lived at that location from that time to this. And when I built that 4-room house, you could build a 4-room house for $100 a room. And we paid carpenters $2.50 for 10 hours work. And that little house cost us about $500 or $600. And of course, there was no water out there then, no electric lights, and no sewers, and practically nothing. And as they came along, we built onto the house, and we at first we used a septic tank in lieu of sewers, and
you don't need to tell them about your quail hunting ability, because I put that on my tape in there, how you get on the train and go to Douglas and then shoot your way back to Fairmont and have 50 quail in your bag.
Yeah, I did.
Well, I told them you did it.
25 of them was mine.
Yeah, well,
Let's have this story about this now.
Well,
Let's have your version about it.
oh, about the quail hunting?
Yes, about the quail.
Well, we had a half section of land, this land I was telling you about a while ago, and at that time there was a lot of quail in the country, and after my wife and I were married, we reserved the hunting rights on that land, and I used to go back down there, and my brother and I, who was later killed at Nash and thrown from a horse in 1910. He was running the bank up there. He was 18 and a half years old. And we'd go down there quail hunting, and we'd go down on the train. We'd turn our bird dogs loose from the baggage car, and we'd start hunting about 100 yards from town, and we'd go out to this land, and we had a creek ran down through it, and we'd go down one side, and when we'd reach the lower end of the half section, we'd eat our lunch, and then we'd cross over to the other side and come back and get back up at the other end of the half section, just about in time to get back in Douglas and get the train into Enid. And most of the time, the two of us, the limit of quail at that time was 25 to the person. And generally at when we'd get back, we'd have our limit.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, we would maybe go down and stay 2 or 3 days, and we would drive down. That's quite a drive at that time.
Yes.
And we'd go down in a buggy. We had a horse and buggy, and we'd go down and hunt, and we'd generally come back with our 25 birds a day.
My goodness.
And so we did that for several years, and then the quail began to thin out.
So you go down by train and then hunt the half a section of land and then come back
Yes,
on the evening train.
in the evening train.
Oh yes.
Hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Butts. It's been such a pleasure to have you.
I hope I've
with this.
given you something
I'm
worthwhile.
sure you have. I'm sure that you have, and the stories that you have given us are most interesting.
I might add, if you have something.
Yes, there's more tape here.
My wife and I have spent 53 summers in Colorado. We have 2 places out there. We have a cabin that we built in Green Mountain Falls in 1920. And then 12 years ago, we bought a year-round home in Chipeta Park. And we enjoy our vacations out there very much. And for the last few years, we spent 3 to 4 months in the year-round home. And
So while it's getting real hot here in Enid, then you're in Colorado.
yes, we're out there. We're out there, and we enjoyed very much. And if
And you and your wife have had 63 years
yes,
together.
she's been in the Methodist Golden Home now for 13 months, and we are hopeful that she'll be able to go to Colorado. Maybe
I hope so.
we probably have to take a jet with flight in 55 minutes.
Yes.
And
Well, I hope she's so that you can, because I
Yes.
know you look forward to that.
we look forward to it.
Well, thank you so much,
Okay.
Mr. But it's been such a pleasure to have you.